everyone, Flare here, and today we will be looking at a highly unusual vehicle. This one in particular is of Soviet design, and has become one of my favorite designs just because of how unusual it really is. And, side note, I only speak English, so some of these pronunciations might not be quite right, so please give me some slack on how I say things. As of recently, we have started pumping out more and more videos. While this is good news for you guys, it does mean that our video editors have to put in more and more work in. As such, we are looking for volunteers that are punctual and willing to put out a video at least once a week. If you are interested, just leave a comment or contact us on our public Discord, which is linked in the description. The STG was a tank designed by Soviet engineer Gremyakin around 1952 to 53. It came as a proposal to the Ministry of Defense of the USSR, which wanted a new medium tank. This new vehicle was supposed to have the armor and firepower of a heavy tank, but with the dimensions and mobility of a medium tank. Now, that just sounds like a bit much if you ask me, even for the Russians. Gremyakin's proposal did not get far, and it is likely it was never given any official name, with no names in the blueprints, which are all that remain. It is now commonly known as the STG, abbreviated from Romanized Russian, Sredniy Tank Gremyakin, or, in English, Gremyakin's medium tank. On May 20th, 1952, the Defense Ministry of the USSR held a meeting with the heads of the largest tank plants and the Marshal of Armored Forces Semyon E. Bogandov on the topic of modernization and the development of new tanks. Shortly after, on 18th of June, the decision was made to develop a new medium tank was made. The chairman at GABTU, or the Main Directorate of Armored Forces, V.V. Orlovsky, held a meeting with N.A. Kuchenko, who was part of the leadership of the Tank Production Department of the Ministry of Transport Engineering of the USSR, and sent the requirements to several factories. It was meant to be superior to the T-54 in most categories, from firepower to range, to armor and speed. The T-54 itself was equipped with a 100mm D-10T gun. The requirements for this new vehicle were supposed to be a mass of 34 tons, initially a 100mm gun, later on a 100mm D-54 rifle gun with 50 rounds of ammunition, width of 3,300mm and a height of no more than that of the T-54, ground clearance of 425mm, 3 machine guns, 2 7.62 and a single 14.5mm AA gun, maximum speed of at least 55 km an hour, off-road speed between 35 to 40 km an hour, and a power-to-weight ratio of 20 horsepower per ton. All of this while maintaining a range of 350 kilometers. Remember what I said earlier about them trying to get too much bang for their buck with a vehicle? Yeah, I think you can start to see it now. Several proposals were presented, one of the most popular being the Object 907 medium tank, which featured an unusual flying saucer-shaped hull. Gremyakin presented his blueprints in June of 1953. He was a qualified engineer, considering the detail and quality of the blueprints, and he might have worked for Factory No. 75, which had previously made several rear-turreted medium tanks, like Object 416, or the Chelyabinsk tractor plant, which also had experience with rear-mounted turrets. Gremyakin's surviving blueprints show a low-silhouette tank with a large rear-mounted turret. The engine and transmission were mounted in the front, driving front-mounted sprockets. Both the front hull and front of the turret were very thickly armored, but got progressively thinner towards the roof. The side and rear armor, however, was still very thick, especially in proportion to the front. Placing the turret to the rear allowed for shorter barrel overhang and better weight distribution. However, it created a host of other problems. The most obvious one was the driver's placement in the turret, creating an awkward driving position, further cramping up the turret and creating a hazard when escaping the tank in an emergency. Additional problems, like sight distortion caused by engine and exhaust heat and barrel damage from the engine cooling intake, might also have been serious. but which can only be confirmed and addressed when reaching a working prototype stage, which Gremyakin's invention, and many others alike, never reached. It's a shame, really. This thing would be quite impressive to see in person. The gun shown in the blueprints was actually a D25T 122mm gun. This could easily have been replaced by the 100mm D54 or 122mm M62, as found on the T10. It is important to highlight this, as the tank was meant to provide heavy tank-like firepower. The D25T was the same gun as on the IS-2 and many other World War II-era Soviet vehicles, rendering it obsolete for 1953. This suggests it was added as a placeholder for another gun, suiting the competition. Its ammunition was two-part, stored in the turret. The projectiles themselves were stored alongside the turret wall, starting from the side of the driver all the way around to the commander. The shell cases were placed in front and started from the gunner and ended at the loader. This suggests that there were some kind of moving system for the shells to make them accessible. The tank had a crew of 4: commander, gunner, loader, and a driver. They were all located in the large turret encircled by the ammunition. The gunner sat to the left of the gun on a seat attached to the turret, from where he could aim and fire the gun, plus use the standard turret controls. Besides the main gun sight, he also had a rotating sight above him for vision. The tank commander sat right behind the gunner. He had 3 or 4 periscopes for vision and also probably controlled the radio, given there's no assigned person for that position. The loader sat on the right side of the gun, loading with his left, usual for Soviet tanks. He had the excruciating job of handling the large ammunition within the very tight space. Thankfully, a loading tray was given so that he could rest the round on it. The driver's position, however, is the most interesting. Located in the turret, in front of the loader, he was in what appears to be a rotating device on its own axis, independent of that of the turret, yet still spinning along with the rest of the turret, consequentially meaning that the turret had a limited traverse. Of course, this is all speculation. He appears to have a rotating device instead of the traditional tillers or steering wheel. For a medium tank, Gremyakin's design was unrealistically well protected. The thickest part of the frontal hull plate was around 320mm thick. Likewise, the base of the turret was a whopping 355mm thick, gradually getting thinner as it rounded upwards to around 60mm at the roof. It gradually got thicker again towards the rear of the turret, with 280mm of armor at the base. Even the rear hull armor was, at the thickest, 140mm angled at 60 degrees, for a total effectiveness of 150mm. The thinnest part of the tank was the whole belly armor, at 25mm. This sort of protection was far superior to contemporary heavy tanks. The T10 had 120mm at the front. This begs the question if the tank could even remain around the 34-ton area. It was larger than the T-54, apart from being slightly lower, but with significantly more armor in raw thickness alone. The suspension of the design is very peculiar. Most Soviet tanks used torsion bar suspension in one form or another. External suspensions were common in pre-war Soviet designs, but their use diminished during the Second World War, both in the Soviet Union but also in other nations. Gremyakin most likely used external suspension to lower the height of the vehicle and improve maintenance and replacement of the suspension, one of the main drawbacks of torsion bar suspension. Yet, what exact system he used is unknown. Externally, it looks like hydropneumatic suspension, similar to that used on some modern main battle tanks. But using hydraulics does not make much sense, and the Soviet Union would not use hydropneumatic suspension on tanks until the 1960s, in tanks like Object 911 and 911B. The only such system used in the 1950s were on the BRDM-1 and 2 armored cars. The rounded shape of the suspension is an indicator to a unique suspension system: torsion springs. These were used on some Italian tanks and armored fighting vehicles. It consisted of a flattened coil, but instead of mounting it vertically, it was mounted inwards. The movement and tension would not be exerted by compression, but by torque. The most basic use of such springs is in clothespins. Considering that it never got a name, Gremyakin's design never got that far. It was plagued from the start by cramping heavy tank armor and guns into a medium tank. Terrible crew ergonomics and little gun mobility were also compromises Soviet tank designers often took in order to keep height and weight down. The largest drawback of Gremyakin's design was ambition. The tank had so many innovative and challenging characteristics. First was placing the driver inside of the turret. This presented a very complex and expensive system, cramping the turret. In addition, it would give a very awkward driving position and compromise turret rotation. It was not a new concept. Tanks like the Object 416 used it previously, but with little success. Secondly, all features and gadgets on the tank would increase its cost of production, maintenance, and complexity. Ammunition pushing system, completely unique suspension, to name a few. Lastly, and most importantly, the armor of the design was, to say the least, excessive. While there is nothing unusual with thick, angled armor, it was surely ambitious for a medium tank program with a 34-ton weight threshold. This would have significantly increased the weight from a vehicle of the weight of the T-54 more to that of the T-10. To maintain its 20 horsepower per ton power-to-weight ratio, it would have required a much larger, more expensive engine. Other designs were selected for trials, like the Object 907 medium tank from VNII 100. However, none of these tanks offered a substantial improvement over either the T-10 and T-54 tanks. Both of those tanks were already in service and were excellent at what they were designed for, not allowing any room for a very expensive medium-heavy hybrid. And that concludes this video. You can find other articles and more information regarding the STG on our website. Ratings, comments, and subscriptions would be greatly appreciated. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Reddit. We also have a link to our Discord community server in the description below. If you would like to help us continue and refine our work, also continue donating on our Patreon or PayPal. Until next time, keep us in your sights.